Well, thanks everybody. We are the Planeteers, and we are thrilled to present our plan to tackle climate change over the next century to you this evening. So our goal is to reduce the planet's long-term dependence on fossil fuels over the next century. So that sounds like it might not be feasible. Well, according to our model, we actually had a 9.5 feasibility rating out of 10. So it definitely is feasible. And how we'll do this is by empowering the renewable energy sector and making sure that the fossil fuel sector gets reinvestments in their infrastructure so that they can, over the long term, be more clean when they produce energy, and that'll be better for the whole planet. So we're very excited to talk about our plan today. So our key policy components include subsidizing renewable energy, of course, as I mentioned, putting carbon taxes in effect. It includes enhancing energy efficient commercial and residential properties and making sure that everyone has up-to-date infrastructure, and also reducing our carbon footprint of agriculture and our lands.
So what you see here is the change in temperature. The red is the current projection, and the projection for model, and the orange is the baseline. So you do see with our model a slight reduction in global GDP per capita, but I'm not an economist, but I think that the benefits of not having coastal cities flood exceeds the cost of some minor global GDP per capita. So in that way, I think that definitely it is a good solution to move forward. Next slide. And much of the burden in our solution falls on land use and agriculture, but as you can see, the CO2 levels from land use have been declining and would have declined anyway without any intervention over the next 100 years. And we only move the needle slightly on the industry, so trends such as using better methods to reduce soil erosion to improve the soil's ability to capture carbon, more precise allotment of synthetic fertilizers or substituting synthetic fertilizers for organic fertilizers can certainly are major policies that have already been implemented and will be implemented further in the future. And also our policies will shift renewable energy from increase their share by about 50% over the next 100 years.
Okay, so we learned a lot of things while we were completing this exercise. One of the first things we learned immediately from our first run of the simulator is that some factors you just really can't change in the way that you would like because of certain policy limitations. So for example, population growth and GDP growth, especially population growth, it has to be a positive growth rate, and the growth rate has to be an increase from what it is now. When we tried decreasing the growth rate of population, it immediately took our feasibility score to 0, and that's just because the developing world is going to keep increasing its population, and that's not something you can put constraints on.
And then also we learned that the simulation definitely worked better when we all worked together. And when one person was leading it and we went around the room and each sector shared what they thought would work, and we worked it out in unison, we saw a lot better feasibility score, and we finally reached 2 degrees. And this also helped us all realize that in the real world, working together to solve this complex issue as climate change is also feasible.
So as you know, we're here to build on the climate summit in Paris that was held this past fall. And so when we looked at our strategy to examine some of the strengths, opportunities, as well as our strongest stakeholders, obviously the first strength and primary benefit is that we've met the ceiling goal of 2 degrees Celsius that we're targeting in the coming future. As well, we eliminate fossil fuel subsidies and replace them with marginal taxes. We knew we needed to have a little bit of impact on the fossil fuel community, but we also knew they were the toughest to get the buy-in, and our models proved that drastic changes in the fossil fuel community impacted both the contentment for the fossil fuel community, as well as the overall political feasibility, and recognizing the global climate, literally no pun intended, as well as the political climate, we knew that feasibility was going to be an important score to keep in mind. Finally, we did place an emphasis on reducing methane leakage. We felt that that was something the fossil fuel community could help contribute to without having that big of an actual cost to them, but it was helping our model. The biggest opportunities we see, so job growth in the renewable energy sector. We consider the renewable energy sector to include the production of energy, but also things like the commercial and residential building improvements, the automobile and transportation industry, and basically anything associated with the benefits of renewable energy, we're hoping to see job growth in. We're also expecting to see an increase in research and development. Now for that, again, it's not just going to be the renewable energy community. As Sarah and Shannon have pointed out, we are expecting the fossil fuel community to come to the table, and because they'll be at the table and they're motivated, they're going to want to do research and development as well. They're going to see some of the benefits overall, and their consumers and stakeholders are going to be happier. For our stakeholders, we did get a high level of buy-in from the fossil fuel community, and we also, in our model, maximized the sustainable energy community score to the best of our ability while ensuring political feasibility. We saw when testing extremes that while you could make the renewable energy community very, very happy, that was not generally politically feasible, and it led to the radically lowered feasibility and contentment scores for other groups. Lastly, we believe that local, state, and federal policymakers will buy into this plan. However, we recognize that this will take time, which is why you'll see as we go through our timeline, we are phasing things in over time to try and target different groups of stakeholders that may need different groups of time in order to buy in. So we'll walk you through our timeline now. On the top part, you've got our tax plan. On the bottom, you have our subsidy plan. So we're launching most things starting in 2020, about 4.5 years out from now. We believe that that will give the industry a lot of time to learn about it, which you'll see on our detailed timeline later. So we're going to launch a carbon tax. We're also going to launch a $3 tax on coal. But however, we're going to have subsidies on new technology, nuclear energy, and renewable energy launching in 2020. When you look at the arrows, we are planning on 5-year programs for those breakthroughs in the sustainable energy categories. We believe that's due to, in part, you might have a little bit of sticker shock from those amounts for the subsidies. However, we believe by having the subsidies be relatively high, the breakthroughs can come faster. Finally, in 2025, we'll institute the rest of our taxes, a $2 tax on oil and a $1 tax on natural gas, with the breakthroughs coming later down the line because we recognize the fossil fuel community. It's going to take them a little bit longer to break the mold and a little bit longer to sell it to their internal stakeholders. So our detailed 5-year plan, starting in 2016, we're going to meet with all of our key stakeholders. That includes our full staffing plan that you guys will see in your memo later, as well as the external stakeholders that we identified previously. In addition, we're going to be launching our public media campaign. That's going to include social media as well as multimedia and a variety of other sources so that we can get the buy-in that we talked about. It has to start early because we recognize this is not something that both the developing and developed world have focused on with this degree of intensity, so we need to get their buy-in. In 2018, our major milestones, we're going to need to drive federal support across the globe, not just in the United States. So we recognize we're going to have to get in those appropriations and funding development processes early to get the buy-in from stakeholders across industries. We're also going to need to start providing training on the new regulations, taxes, and subsidies because we don't want there to be delays and pain when we launch them in 2020, so we recognize we need to start those plans early. In 2020, our major milestones are that the taxes and subsidies go into effect. And finally, in 2022, we believe that we will start to see the documented, clear job growth in all the sectors because as the subsidies kick in and as the benefits are slowly realized, we believe that industry will continue to fund them. Any questions?
I think you guys did a really good job, and particularly with keeping your fossil fuel stakeholders happy. The agricultural sector feeds the world, and they are taking a huge lift in your policy package and your model. So I'm curious as to kind of how you approached reaching the cuts within the agriculture industry, and then how you plan to keep them satisfied and on board with this plan.
So a lot of it reflects trends that have already been happening. So the move towards organic food, which does not use synthetic fertilizer, and a large portion of agricultural greenhouse gas emissions come from the use of synthetic fertilizer, which is mostly nitrogen-based. And a lot, even if it's not eliminated, there's an incentive for farmers to over-allocate fertilizer. So by more precisely doing so, they could reduce that certain element of it. But a lot of it is a big example is programs at industrial feedlots for cattle, pigs, to capture the methane release from the animal waste and reuse that for actual energy on the farm so that the farm isn't emitting methane and also importing energy from the grid. So that's a more efficient solution. But it certainly would be a short-term, it's certainly possible that food prices could rise in the short term, but a lot of our interventions reflect trends that the industry has already been implementing over the past 10 to 20 years and plans to implement further in the future.
Did you implement a carbon tax overall besides the specific taxes on oil, natural gas, and coal?
Yeah, we had a $130 per ton tax on carbon.
Effective in 2020.
How do you plan to offset the cost for all of the programs to garner support that go into effect before you start making any revenue?
Could you be a little bit more specific?
Can you go back a slide? You talk about social media campaign, training for government, and meeting with stakeholders, stuff like that, like big events and programs that cost a lot of money. How are you going to do for all that?
Well, those are things that are usually budgeted into most big programs like this. For example, the Affordable Care Act had a lot of publicity leading up to it and kind of like media events telling people to register. So we foresee that that's something that will have already been in the budget and should be pretty easy to get our stakeholders to buy into because it's pretty par for the course for this kind of event.
Also, leveraging social media, when you study sort of the climate change support, especially in the celebrity community, there are a lot of buy-ins, so we should be able to leverage a lot of free media from those sources as sort of a megaphone for the federal and state and local policies.
I noticed, if I understood the graphic right, you did project a much slower, somewhat slower growth rate in per capita GDP. Yeah, thank you. Yet you also had the conversation about how limiting both population and GDP growth was politically difficult. So I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about how we're going to pull this off, how we're going to get folks to agree to be less wealthy in 2100, particularly given the high levels of global poverty.
So, okay.
Oh yeah, well we found that moving both population and GDP was 100% infeasible. We had a zero feasibility rate of that. And moving population was more feasibly difficult than moving GDP, and one or the other has to shift in some kind of meaningful way, just because of the contribution that both of them have to emissions.
And I think it's important to remind people that 80% of the global population lives in a coastal city or a coastal area. So while it would, from that perspective, I can see why it would be certainly unpopular by providing all the information of the consequences of inaction. I feel like that would be one way we could certainly communicate that.
And
we had a stakeholder score of 10.
yeah, so we had a population GDP stakeholder of 10, but just building upon that too, some of the constraints built into the model, it really is a climate change focused model. So this doesn't take into account innovation in the private sector outside of the environmental sphere. So if you want to talk about IT, if you want to talk about just basically any sector of the economy. Now, while they're all impacted by climate change, if you look in the nuts and bolts of the model, it doesn't include a lot of economic drivers outside of the drivers that are within the climate change community. And so I think if you were to build in a more robust economic model, you might be able to shift that GDP per capita line without necessarily having a great impact on the environment. That's a hypothesis, though, don't quote me.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's a subject for further discussion.
Yeah.
Do you know the reduction in the cost of energy by 2100 from your model?
Well, give me 1 second. Nope, I'm not on the right laptop. Do you have it, Will?
No.
All right.
And just kind of on that, and if you don't know off the top of your head, it's fine, but do you know what your energy mix looks like at the end of this?
So we did have the.
Oh, they did have it.
Yeah.
There it is, okay.
So while we didn't get down to 95, we got down to 75. Cool. Maintained our political feasibility as well as our global energy score.
One of the big drivers for this too was, the buying of the fossil fuel industry, right? So making sure that they agreed to a high retirement percentage rate was key to putting their support. And so although they have a lot of responsibility in making sure that their own infrastructure gets updated and gets more clean. Long term, they'll be able to reap the benefits of that by having their energy cost less and therefore maintaining their high levels of profits that they love.
Great.